Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC.
遅かったね。
うん。雛形先生と一緒に他の子たちのところへお見舞いに。
ちょっと嫉妬しちゃうかな。私だけへのお見舞いだったらよかったのに。
でもみんな少しは辛いのが和らいだように見えたよ。
鈴夢には悪いのを追い払っちゃう素敵な力があるからね。
Yet, I failed to save Kurakami with that power. If Kiko was any indicator, Minobe and Lydia would also be back to normal within a few days. No, perhaps they'd be well enough to go back to school by tomorrow. At least I'd managed to save 3. That was right. That was the silver lining. I didn't want to believe I was corrupted. My mere presence brought everyone misfortune. I didn't want to believe that. That night, I called my dad. I figured he might know something. But he didn't know that Susuda had originally been written as Field of Soot. Furthermore, he was furious at Kurakami's claims I was corrupted, saying no one who trained under the sacred divine tribute style could be corrupted. My father wasn't two-faced. He was no liar. Meaning he really didn't know anything. Once I hung up, I noticed I had a call from Kiko. I called her back, and she picked up right away.
長い電話だったね。誰？
家に電話してたんだよ。いろいろ聞きたいことがあって。
そうなんだ。本当に？
嘘なんかつかないよ。
だよね。ごめんねごめんね。てっきり他の女の子とずっと電話してるのかと思って。女の嫉妬って見苦しい見苦しいよね。反省。
なんで嫉妬なんかするの？
だって私と進って付き合ってるわけでしょ。深夜のプライベートな時間に電話とかできるってのは彼女の特権だと思うし。
そうだね。他の女の子と長話をしてたらなんだか面白くないよね。
でもね、その一方でプライベートな時間を自分だけが侵食してもいいっていうのもおごりだと思うわけ。進が誰と電話したってどう過ごしたって自由な時間のはずなのに、それを自分だけが独占したいってひどいなって思って。
恋人同士ってそういうのあるよね。でも僕はなんだかそういうのはおかしいなって思うんだ。だってお互いより楽しい人生を作るために一緒になったんでしょ。
だよね。なのに一緒になった後の方が気苦労が多いんじゃおかしいよね。つまるところ私が鈴夢を信頼していない証拠なわけだし、もっと大人になって素敵な彼女になる。
Huh? What's up with my phone? I checked it to find I had an incoming call from Lydia. But I was talking with Kiko at the moment, so I wasn't in a position to pick up.
どうしたの？
リリアちゃんから電話みたい。なんだろうね。後でメールで聞いてみるよ。
しなくていいよ。どうせ大した用事じゃないよ。こんな遅い時間にかけてくるなんて。 失礼しちゃうよね。
Kiku's voice was stone cold, like someone else had taken over the phone. That sound sent shivers down my spine.
大方、スズムがお見舞いに来てくれたんで浮かれてるんだよ。自分だけのとこに来てくれたとでも思ってんのかな。おめでたい女だね。あの子、芸能人ってだけあって、私たちと生きてる世界が違うから。あの子が何を言っても、あまり真に受けない方がいいと思うよ。そもそもアイドルなんて気のありそうなふりをして自分に恋愛を錯覚させるプロってことでしょ。スズムのこと珍しいタイプだからからかってみたいだけって陰で言ってたの聞いたもん。男に貢がせることを小学校の時から仕事にしてきたような子だよ。生きてる世界が違いすぎるよ。でもスズムは男の子だからついつい騙されちゃうようなことがあるかもしれない。だから私のいないところであの子と話をしたりメールをしたりしちゃダメ。約束して。
I didn't want to believe Kiku would say those kinds of things about Rydia. And naturally, I didn't want to believe Rydia prided herself in tricking people either.
僕を信じてほしいな。僕は今キコちゃんとお付き合いをしてるんだよ。誤解を招くようなことをしてキコちゃんを悲しませるようなことは絶対にしないよ。
ごめんねスズム。これってスズムが悪いわけじゃないし、だからスズムがそんなに申し訳なさそうにするのはおかしいよ。だってあの子がスズムに興味を持つのはそれだけスズムが魅力的な証拠だもん。そのスズムを虫から守るのは彼女の務めだと思う。だからスズムは全然気にしなくていい。私が頑張るから。
頑張るって？
こっちの話スズムは忘れて。
I never could have imagined such hollow laughter from Kiko. The two of us were only separated by a thin wall. I could hear some sort of sound coming from her room. Whack, whack. It sounded like someone kicking the bed or something.
キコちゃん。
I could hear her labored breathing, so I couldn't tell her. I definitely couldn't tell her that I'd just received a text from Minobe.
じゃあ今夜はこれできるね。おやすみスズム。
おやすみ。
My phone shook as I hung up. I'd gotten a text from Rydia this time. I was afraid to check what it said. Kiko was just on the other side of this wall. I didn't know how she'd take it if she learned that I'd read text from the both of them. I couldn't imagine it at all. No, I was too afraid to imagine it. Just then, I heard a thud from the next room so loud that it even shook my own a little. I could hear indignant roars through the wall.
電切ってんじゃねえよ、熱ガキが。
I could hear her as loudly as if she were in this very room. She must have just called Rydia. I was sure of it. A moment later, the wall shook with a violent kick. I couldn't tell if she'd kicked it out of rage over Rydia, or if she was trying to threaten me. It would be best to delete the texts without reading them, but it could have been something important. So I'd take a quick peek to find out. And if it wasn't, I'd delete it and forget all about it. I carefully surveyed my surroundings. I doubted there was a hole in the wall or anything. My curtains were shut. I was okay. I'd be fine. With a loud gulp, I opened the text. Text from Ridia Nunukawa 1. Subject: Thank you for today. Thank you so much for coming to visit me today, Susahara. I am so sorry my room was such a mess. I am so embarrassed. Lol. Please come back again sometime, okay? By the way, were you aware that Harumiya used to be a major delinquent until middle school? She was a member of a gang of female delinquents known as the Bloodstained Angels. If you search for Bloodstained Angels and Bakiko, you will find some frightening photos. Where did she find out about that? As if the gossip about Kiko wasn't bad enough already. The text started out calm, but she stopped using punctuation abruptly, turning the text into walls of letters slandering Kiko. That girl's crazy. She's insane. Did you know she hurt some people so bad they had to go to the hospital? She has a history with the police, too. Isn't it crazy how someone like that can put on such a cutesy act? It's stupid, isn't it? She should die. Goddamn piece of shit. Pisses me off so much. I knew I shouldn't have looked. Though my time with the LCSE hadn't been long, I got along with everyone and thought it'd last forever. I didn't want to read something like this. Lydia's text had left a deep scar on my heart. There was still one more to go. Minobe's text. Honestly, I was depressed, so I decided to only read the subject. Text from Kanae Minobe. Subject number 1. Smiley face.
何のこと？
There was also an image attached. What in the world was this? I carelessly opened the text. Sorry, Suzumun, but I just can't give up on you. So I decided to cast a charm that will cause you and Kiki to break up peacefully. It's a love charm popular in the Akane Minobe Kingdom. It works like a charm, literally. I'll send you one of these each night till my wish comes true. Here's the first one. What she had attached was a photo of a slender, blood-stained left leg. Was that Minobe's leg? Her left leg was sitting on top of a bloody white towel with a gaping cut in her ankle. A razor was sitting next to it. She must have used that to slice herself open. I groaned as bile welled up in my throat. There was one last message written after the photo. I'll send you another one tomorrow night. Hope you're looking forward to it. I threw my phone away and crawled under my covers. If I didn't stop thinking immediately, these emotions would certainly swallow me whole. I screamed as I heard a text notification chime. I didn't want to see another text that night. Three human figures stood in the classroom, illuminated only by the faint moonlight. They were holding hands, standing in a circle. A desk with a small candle sitting on top stood between them. That tiny light illuminated them and projected their shadows onto the classroom wall, looming large like monsters. They looked both like humans and like deer standing on their hind legs. As for why one would think that, the shadows had branch-like horns growing out of their heads.
しや人鬼め。復讐は夢見てすでに幾清楚。あの子が欲しい。あの子じゃわからん。相談しましょう。そうしましょう。
The three horned humans slowly spun around as they sung a tuneless children's song. Their expressions were completely vacant.
お山の鹿さんちょっと来ておくれ。鬼がいるから行かれない。お釜をかぶってちょっと来ておくれ。角があるからかぶれない。お布団かぶってちょっと来ておくれ。すすって真っ黒かぶれない。あの子が欲しい。あの子じゃわからん。相談しましょう。そうしましょう。
All of a sudden, they stopped. A heavy silence descended. None of them so much as moved a muscle.
包むが欲しい。
Snap, snap. A sound like the crushing of piled branches resounded. Kane had crushed Tsubakiko's fingers. Yet Tsubakiko didn't even blink.
包むはやらん。
Another snap. Tsubakiko bent Kane's fingers back.
おすすが欲しい。
Snap, snap.
おすすはやらん。
Another snap, followed by the sound of mashing meat.
すすさふらしておいたし。人鬼の里さを置いたし。わざわざ募らす呪いのすすさ。
The three kept singing and crushing each other's fingers as though it were some sort of children's game. They started out in a circle, but that gradually broke apart. Just then, the three bizarre human-like creatures started swelling and mixing together.
鈴が欲しい。私が欲しい。むしらにゃゆつら。
They clawed, bit, and tore each other apart. Loud and wet sounds roared every time they met, and dark splashes painted the walls, blackboard, floors, and desks. Eventually, the desk with the candle fell over, extinguishing the only light in the room. The sole illumination left in the pitch-black classroom was the faint strands of moonlight shining through. All that gleamed through the darkness was the crimson glow of eyes not human. It was impossible to even tell where three of them... It was impossible to even tell there were three of them anymore. They merely continued swaying and eating each other. Splatters of black blood and chunks of gnawed-off flesh littered the room. Fingers, skin, earlobes, eyelids, nails, scalps, blood vessels, and entrails were scattered everywhere. Eventually, the human-like figures turned into husks. They convulsed over and over, but it seemed they were no longer capable of killing. There was too little of them left. One of the husks staggered to its feet. Their whole body had been torn at and gnawed limb from limb, so they couldn't even be called human-like anymore. All that was left was a shell, a human skeleton clad in blood-stained flesh and blood vessels. It rose off the ground, looked to the ceiling, and howled.
これでスズムは私だけのもの。スズム
I couldn't make heads or tails of that dream, but it felt real to me. Kiku's room was unlocked, and her shoes were gone. She'd gone out on her own in the middle of the night. I called her phone, but it merely shone in her dark room. I didn't know where she'd gone, but my nightmare had taken place at school. I couldn't get a good look in the dark, but it appeared to have been the LCSE's club room. The entryway was probably locked, so I couldn't get in from there. But the LCSE's club room was right by the infirmary. The infirmary was right in front of where you crossed over the schoolyard, so the club room was... All of a sudden, I thought I saw a small light coming from within the club room window. It wasn't the room's lights. This light was orange and swaying. I ran over to the window and realized it was fire. Flames had spread all throughout the club room, brightly illuminating the world inside. At that moment, there was an orange burst, and the windows scattered and scattered everywhere like snow. I ran through that blizzard and jumped into the club room. Crimson flames were slowly burning the room. And just as I'd seen in my nightmare, Minobe, Ryuya, and Tsubakiko were in the center, reduced to chunks of meat. So that really wasn't a dream. All three of them had fallen for me and fought over me. And then they killed each other here. I brought about this tragedy. Kurakami was right. I was corrupted, cursed. So this happened because I got close to them. And even if I wanted to apologize, I couldn't even tell which one of them was which anymore. Just then, the flames swelled higher, like a wave. And as their scorching winds blazed on through, I felt someone slowly stand up behind me. I turned around and saw her. Her voice and figure were Kiko's, but that couldn't be, because Kiko was already nothing more than a pile of flesh at my feet. So, no matter how much it looked like her, it wasn't. But I couldn't help but see it as her.
ごめんよ、キコちゃん。僕はやっぱり呪われていたんだ。
いいんだよ、スズミ。スズミのせいじゃない。だってこれはずっと気が遠くなるほどの昔に決められた運命だもの。だからスズムのせいじゃないんだよ。
I slowly embraced the girl clad in flames. Her flames engulfed me, and before long our shapes became one. The flames would scorch all, burn them to the ground, and reduce them to soot. Kiko, Minobe, Lydia, me, all of us. We'd turn to soot, become one, and return to heaven. All of us would become one.
1000年待ったんだよ。
Huh?
やっと迎えに来てくれたんだね。
She had been waiting in there for so long, trapped in that bronze prison along with the soot for 1,000 agonizing years. I see. It's because of her that I embarked on that long journey. In my last moments, I finally realized it. This was where I was meant to return. It's interesting that there's a sequence for every chapter. I guess it's like these are like individual episodes. Reminds me a lot of like oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of the real popular anime where character dies over and over again, but the world's the same. I think it's like Beginning from Zero or something like that. Really reminds me a lot of that. Even the same sort of tragic endings that happen in that series as well. I do kind of wonder how this is all going to end up. You know, if every story is like an obsession with Susahara that ends up in everyone dying. I mean, I think we've gone through all the characters. We'd have to introduce new characters to kill if we wanted to keep going. But it's been interesting. I mean, I do like the very descriptive text, which makes it makes it very horrifying. And they don't really give you that many visuals, so I think it helps your imagination. And it's very, very descriptive text as well. The plants, flowers, and even animals were wasting away from the long drought. The villagers had reached the last of their limited provisions. The crop fields had lost their vibrancy, and they could expect little from the autumn harvest at this rate. If they had only been lush, then the villagers could have had hope. They wanted rain, but more than anything, they wanted food to last them through the day. The villagers, starved and dehydrated, groveled. All they could do was wait for a blessing from the heavens. That said, they couldn't just sit back and starve to death either. A group of young men with energy to spare fought back their hunger as they prowled the hills and mountains for game and edible plants. A wounded deer ran through the dead trees covering the mountainside. It was the first prey they'd trapped in a while, but just when they were about to kill it, it went berserk and tore out of the trap. Even Mutsu, the fastest and strongest youth in the village, had a hard time catching a wild deer on the run, despite its injuries. But after leaping over a thin mountain stream, the deer ran out of breath and crouched to the ground. The young men readied their spears and tried to cross the stream. But Mutsu shook his head, stopping them.
ダメだよ。沢の向こうは六神様のお山だ。
それは分かってるけど、お山の神様だって少しは目をつむってくださるじゃろう。
お山は禁足地だよ。人間は踏み入ってはいけない。それがこの地に住むことを許されたご先祖様と六神様の約束だよ。
六神様のたたりはごめんじゃ。
The deer appeared to know the same thing. It calmly crouched there and stared back at its impotent pursuers. The mountain of Lord Rokugami must never be tread upon. That was the sole taboo imposed on the villagers. It was said that Rokugami, the deer god's retainers, the golden deer, lived there on the mountain. The mere act of seeing one would extend your lifespan, and the creatures were worshipped. But the mountain was holy ground, bringing earthly corruption onto which would result in wrath most ferocious.
仕方ないよ。お山は犯せない。他を探そう。
手ぶらじゃ帰れんぞ。
みんなで散って何か食べられるものを探そう。
もうあらかた食えるもんは取り尽くしたぞ。
それでも何か見つけるしかないんじゃ。
頑張ろう。
The young men weakly nodded and split up. If they didn't eat, they'd die. If they didn't want to die, they'd have to find food. From a modern perspective, this was an era where death was a constant companion. But that was just the way things were back then. Those who were born in those times never questioned them. Hunger and the ever-present threat of death were only natural. A certain robust young man had lived in this era. His name was Mutsu. There were various theories regarding when the faith centered around the god known as Rokugamehiko no Mikoto began. If the oldest writings were to be believed, it already existed at some point between the 8th and 12th centuries. In other words, over 1,000 years ago. It is likely the mountain was designated a non-hunting area so as to prevent people from hunting game, such as deer, to the point of extinction. Eventually, it became a holy ground and was revered as a sacred mountain where the deer god, Rokugami, lived. And that god became known as Rokugamehiko no Mikoto, the deity enshrined in Iwaihime Shrine.
となると、ご神体はその山ということになるのよね、普通。
この神社の裏手にある山がそうなのでしょうか。
その山は黒神家が所有してはいるけれど、特に信仰の対象にはなってないの。六神彦の命の負わした聖なる山はどこのことだったのか。郷土史の研究家たちが頑張ったみたいだけど、未だによくわかってないの。
なら、この神社は何をご神体にしているんでしょう。
もちろん一般公開はされてないから、ほとんどの参拝客は知らない。でも、研究の結果、ご神体の正体は分かってるの。後で教えるけれど、とても意外なものよ。
It was the Sunday after the Iwaimoto shopping district's Happy Fun Carnival. Miss Hinagata had told me she wanted to talk about something, and so we met at Iwaimoto Shrine. Last week I did something rather shameful. We'd had a sleepover in order to prepare for an early morning. However, I must have caught a cold, as the next day I broke out into a fever that forced me to leave the others and go home early. Perhaps it was punishment for my frivolous behavior. Kiko had confessed to me the day before that. At first I thought going out with her would make for a good learning experience, but I was still in the middle of my training. Until I became a full-fledged man, it was too early for love. I told Kiko that the day of the sleepover. I'd given her the okay at first, and I appreciated her feelings, but I wanted us to go back to the way we were before. Kiko was miffed, to say the least. But eventually she forgave me with a smile. I believe I made the right decision. As for why, I'd had a horrible dream that night that began with us confessing to everyone that we'd started dating. I'd been having bad dreams since the night before. It may even have been the same nightmare over and over again. I ended up hurting Kiko a little. I would have to reflect on that and continue training hard. And that brings us to today.
ご神体はね、本殿にあるのよ。本殿はさらに向こうね。もちろんそこは非公開。無理に暴けばたたりがあるそうだから、一般人は誰も入れないけれどね。
僕たちはそのご神体に向かってこの拝殿から拝むわけですね。
そういうこと。まあ神社はどこもそうなんだけどね。
Miss Hinagata had called me over to the shrine to tell me something in private. But since it was all related to the shrine itself, I felt like I was on a field trip. At first I thought she was going to explain why she invited me to join the LCSC. However...
先生は神社とか郷土史とかに詳しいんですね。
まあね、ちょっと縁があっていろいろと調べてたことがあるの。
縁って 何ですか？
何から話せばいいやら私も戸惑ってるわ。鈴原くんに信じてもらえるように話せる自信が未だにないの。
普通ではとても信じてもらえないような話なんですか？
普通の人にはとてもね。だから最初は昔話から始めることにしたの。この町の子なら小学校の時に習うくらい誰でも知っているこの土地の昔話。
In the end, all they could do was look for edible plants. But Mutsu refused to be discouraged and went into a thicket to search. Unlike modern times, people ate whatever they could back then. They didn't have much of a choice when it came to food. So finding anything edible would be a boon beyond all reckoning.
見つかればの話だけれどね。
He decided to go a little further. Anything edible in the easily accessible places had already been taken by others, so the trick was to look in places harder to reach. Mitsu looked for edible plants while also searching for animal tracks. Animals were major targets. Finding a trail meant a chance to trap one.
もっとも向こうも飢えてるだろうからね。僕が逆に彼らの食事にされてしまわないように気をつけないと。
The bears and wolves were nowhere to be found, but they must have left their usual territories to sate their hunger. Mutsu honed his senses, knowing he was outside his usual territory as well. Just then, he heard rustling through the thicket. A rabbit? A raccoon dog? Or could it be a wolf? Mutsu crouched down, held his breath, and observed carefully. But in the end, what he saw defied expectations.
落ち着いて。僕は野党じゃないよ。
She must have been scared by his hunting spear. Mitsu lowered it and attempted to convey he bore no ill will.
それは失礼をいたしました。
Mitsu couldn't take his eyes off her. What he'd found was a great beauty of an Azusa priestess. Azusa priestesses referred to wandering shrine priestesses in this era. As mediums who could channel gods and spirits, they were sanctified and respected. They were also evangelists, as well as peddlers who brought wisdom and rare goods from afar. And since they were all beautiful young women, it was said they were gladly welcomed by every village they visited.
このようなところで何を？道に迷われましたか？
どうかお助けを。それが足を踏み外して。
The Azusa priestess guided Mitsu to a steep slope at the edge of a thicket. At the bottom crouched an elderly priestess. It seemed she'd gotten lost amidst the animal trails and didn't notice the sudden slope until it was too late. Fortunately, a tree trunk had broken her fall, but she'd be in real danger if she took another tumble.
ババ様、人を呼んでまいりました。
それは助かるよ。
足をくじいている。
はい、それにババ様はあまり目が。
僕が助けるよ。おばあさん、そこにじっとしてて。今助けるから。
Mitsu nimbly descended the slope. He managed to reach the elderly woman with little difficulty.
大丈夫？足をやった。
どうにもね。どうにもね。
腫れ上がってる。無理に立とうとしないで。担ぐから。
Mitsu carried the old woman on his back and carefully ascended the slope. She and her companion's luggage were by no means light, but they weren't anything the robust Mitsu couldn't handle. So he took his time making it back up. Eventually, he managed to bring the old woman to the top of the slope.
ババ様、足が大変。
村は遠くないよ。このまま運ぼう。
よろしいのですか？すみません。
困った時はお互い様さ。
私、鈴の目と申します。あなた様のお名前はお聞かせください。
ムツ。大した名前じゃないんだ。6人目に生まれたからムツらしいよ。
ムツ様、感謝します。このご恩は忘れません。本当にありがとうございます。
Mitsu felt a red tinge spread across his cheeks when he saw her smile. His heart soared for the first time in his life. Little did they know this would spark a love that would span a millennium.
1000年遅い。
Snap. A sound akin to a snapping branch resounded from somewhere within the dolls encircling me. Another doll had broken, unable to endure the soot. No number of them would be enough. Even the final doll, my own body, would likely burst in the near future.
小賢しや人にたちよ。なれど1000年の長きを耐え、我はようやくこれだけのすすを集めた。もう次はな。お前で小賢しき術も終わりを迎えるのだ。
私の苦しみ抜いた1000年にもはや意味などないのか。
哀れな女よ。我とてお前にだけは同情せずにはいられぬぞ。
お前の同情などいらない。
1000年をめぐりようやく帰ってきた思い人であろうが、
この運命はお前のいたずらなのか。
これは1000年をよく耐え、人鬼たちの人柱としての運命を全うしたお前への我からのささやかなねぎらいである。
ざれ言を
どうせもう終わる運命ではないか。1000年を経て帰ってきた愛しき男を抱きながら死にたいとは思わぬか。あの男に抱かれたいだろう。
鈴原先輩に抱かれたい。スズムの濃いドロドロのすす欲しい。私の中にスズムの恋のいっぱい注ぎ込んで。
お前が抱かぬなら、あれを抱きたい者はいくらでもいるようだぞ。
うるさい。あんたがいらないならおいらがもらう。鈴原先輩に抱いてもらって。 愛してもらう。濃くってドロドロしてネバネバする。進むのすすいっぱい欲しい。黒髪先輩がいらないなら。
Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is audap. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.